This week is the Parsha of Emor. So we'll begin by learning one of the mitzvahs in this week's Parsha, which is very much connected to the time that we're living in, Sefiras Haomer. So in the middle of the Parsha of Emor, there's what's known as Parshas HaMoados, the Parsha which discusses all of the holidays, the Yom Tovim, throughout the year, the Shalosh Regalim, Rosh Hashanah, and Yom Kippur. So we learned after discussing the laws or some of the sacrifices pertaining to Pesach. The Torah says that there's a special ritual, there's a special mitzvah, which was known as the offering of the Haomer. So the Torah says that when the Jewish people would go into the land of Eretz Yisrael, there was they would cut the Haomer, which the Haomer is a certain measure of grain, of bringing it to the Beis HaMikdash. And in the Rambam and in other sources discusses how this ritual was done. It was after the first day of Yom Tov at night, which in Eretz Yisrael was no longer Yom Tov. They would go out into the fields and they would take big piles of barley, and they would bring a sickle and a basket. They would bring it to the field. They would cut a measure. They would use three. In fact, they would use three baskets, three sickles. They would cut this barley and put it into a basket, and they would bring it to the Beis HaMikdash. And the Haomer was a measurement about between 1.5 to 2.5 kilo of grain, and they would bring it to the Beis HaMikdash. It would be a special elevation offering in the Beis HaMikdash. Now, subsequent to that, the Torah says, after this Haomer offering was brought, the Torah says, "Usfartim lachem mimacharas haShabbos." There's a mitzvah to count mimacharas haShabbos, which means the morrow of the Shabbos, the day after the Shabbos, which literally Shabbos we would understand to mean. Debbie, you're having trouble with audio. If you can't hear, perhaps on the bottom left corner, if it says computer audio, that's where you should attempt to connect. Otherwise, perhaps try to log out and come back in. In any case, the Torah says on the morrow of the Shabbos, you should begin to count from the day that you bring the Haomer 7 weeks. Sheva Shabbosos Tmimus Tihiyana. 7 complete weeks that we should count. Now the Torah says B'macharas HaShabbos, which ostensibly means the day of Shabbos, but our sages understood and interpreted that this means not just Shabbos, but the day refers to Yom Tov. And we've discussed in the past the significance of that and the whole debate, which was one of the great debates in Jewish history between the traditional Judaism and the Sadducees as to what that means. The Sadducees, who only interpreted the literal interpretation of Torah, they rejected the Torah Shebaal Peh, the oral tradition. They understood Macharas HaShabbos to mean literally the day after Shabbos. However, the intent of the Torah is, of course, the day after Yom Tov. So the day after the first day of Pesach, which for us it's the second day of Yom Tov, on that night, we cut the Haomer and we begin to count the Haomer. The Torah tells us we have to count 7 complete weeks, 49 days, and subsequent to that, the Torah says, Ad B'macharas HaShabbos HaShviz Tisper Chamishim Yom. When we reach the 50th day, there's a new offering that's brought. It's the Yom Tov of Shavuos. There was a special grain offering of wheat that was brought to the Beis HaMikdash as well. Now, the Haomer, which was cut, was ideally, and according to many opinions, the only way it could be done was during the nighttime. The Haomer has to be cut then, and the offering was done the following day. And thus, we cut the Haomer at night, and we begin to count at night, because the Torah says that the Sefiras needs to be 7 complete weeks. And the only way you could have a complete 7 complete weeks is if we start from the night before. Whereas if we would count during the day, we would be missing out the night before, which wouldn't be inclusive of the entire week. However, let's say so. Therefore, the halacha is that when it comes to counting of the Omer, we begin counting during the nighttime, from the night, the very first night, the second night of Pesach. That is when we begin to count the Omer. However, let's say in the subsequent, even the first day or in the subsequent days, a person failed to count during the nighttime. So one opinion says, since during the times of the Beis Hamikdash, if the Omer was not brought during the night, it was permissible to bring to cut the Omer during the day. It is permissible to count during the day. Others' opinions say no, you cannot cut the Omer during the daytime, and therefore they say if you forgot to count at night, you cannot count during the day. And thus, since there's two opinions, we have the Safek Brachas Lahakil, that is the general rule that when we're in doubt, we do not make a bracha, and therefore a person is allowed to count during the day, but they should do it without a bracha. Another interesting debate that occurred when it comes to Sefiras Haomer is, let's say a person counted a few days, but then inadvertently or for whatever reason, they did not count an entire 24 hours. So the question is, when it comes to the next day, so in other words, let's say you're holding the 10th day and you forgot to count on the 9th day. Are you able to count on the 10th day? So again, there's two opinions. One opinion says, of course, every night is a separate mitzvah. Just because you didn't count yesterday, you can continue to count today. And another opinion says, no, the Halachas Gedolos, one of the great authorities from the Gaonic period, they say that no, that if you missed out one night, you can no longer count on subsequent nights. In their view, Sefira constitutes one continuum, one big block, and every night you count, and therefore, if you missed out one night, there's a missing link, and you can no longer count in the subsequent nights. So, what we have from all of this is a very interesting mitzvah, and it's very rare, which we don't find in many other areas of the Torah. This concept of counting days, which at first glance bears a lot of explanation. And that is, number one, this idea of counting from the time when the Omer was cut and offered in the Beis Hamikdash seems to be, bears explanation. What is the significance? Why are we counting days from when we cut the Omer? We don't find that in other areas, counting days from when it was Sukkot, when it was Pesach. We don't find that anywhere else in the Torah, where we have this period of time where we count from a certain point till we get to another point. Now we have this concept of counting in other areas, but there's a logic to it. Whereas here there doesn't seem to be at face value what's the significance of counting specifically from the cutting of the Omer, number one. And number two, even if you are going to count, for example, the Chinuch famously says, one of the great commentators who explains often the rationale of various mitzvahs, he says that we count because, of course, the essential lifeblood of the Jewish people is the Torah. And we are looking forward to the receiving of the Torah at Matan Torah, which takes place on the Yom Tov of Shavuos, and therefore we are eagerly awaiting and counting the days down till Shavuos. Okay, that's a very nice explanation. But what's lacking here is, if that is the case, that we are counting towards the receiving of the Torah on Shavuos, Matan Torah, so then the counting should not be, and the manner of the counting, we say today is 1 day to the Omer, 2 days to the Omer. The counting should not be towards the past. This is how many days is from Sefiras Haomer, from the bringing of the Omer. 1 day or 2 days. It should be, this is how many days we have left until Shavuos. There's 49 days on the first day. We should say there's 49 days till Shavuos. There's 48 days till Shavuos on the next night, and so on and so forth. Why are we counting backwards what's gone in the past? These are how many days that have passed since the cutting of the Omer. If many times in life we look forward to something, we look forward to a special event, a birthday, a wedding, there's a vacation. We don't say, well, this is how many days that have passed since we booked the vacation, or how many days have passed since last time we went to a special event. We look forward to that special event and we count towards it. So if so, why are we counting backwards? Another question is, if we are indeed counting towards the receiving of the Torah, why did we pick specifically the Omer? The Omer was brought the day after the first day of Pesach, on the 16th of Nisan. We should seemingly be counting from the night before. It would seem that there's a certain relationship between Pesach and Shavuos. Count from Pesach. Count the 49 or 50 days from Pesach until Shavuos. Perhaps that would have been more logical. Why did we pick the Omer offering, which was a sacrifice, just a sacrifice that was an offering in the Beis HaMikdash? And some commentators explain that ultimately Pesach is all about the remembrance, the commemoration of the miracle when the Jewish people left Mitzrayim many years ago, and therefore they didn't want to in any way convolute or in any way diminish from the importance of the miracle and focus on other matters such as the receiving of the Torah. That's an explanation that's brought. And they say, therefore, this explanation. There's another explanation why we don't count towards Shavuos. We don't say 49 days till Shavuos to Matan Torah, 48 days. Rather, we count back because we don't want to feel that we're so distant. There's so many days left till Shavuos. There's 48 days, 49 days. Therefore, we count how many days we have passed. In any case, these are some of the explanations that's brought, but it's still we need something deeper. We need the Hasidic mystical interpretation, which is going to breathe a very special perspective into the whole mitzvah of Sefiras Haomer. And lastly, a fascinating thing that if we think about it, the mitzvah of the bringing of the Omer and the mitzvah of the bringing that special offering for Shavuos, we find, as we mentioned before, that the Omer is a offering of barley. That is the time in the agricultural cycle where the barley ripens first, and it is harvested at the time, right at around the Yom Tov of Pesach, in the beginning of the spring. And 50 days later, we harvest the wheat, the grain of wheat, which is then brought as an offering for the Yom Tov of Shavuos. Now, the difference between the grain of barley and that of wheat is that grain of barley is what the Talmud calls maichel behema. It is food that is foods for animals, whereas the grain of wheat is considered maichel adam. That is the food that is for human consumption. Generally speaking, when you go to the store and you buy bread, you don't find barley bread. We have barley sometimes. We mix it into a soup or a cholent or something like that. But generally speaking, barley is not a refined grain such as wheat. And so it seems that this whole notion of the Omer offering and Shavuos is very much linked to the agricultural cycle. That the Omer is in between Pesach and Shavuos. And there's a special relationship to the agricultural cycle, as we know that in those times the Jewish community in particular, but of course the world at large, very much the economy was related and very much connected and dependent on the agricultural cycle. And some explain that this was the reason we had to bring the Omer offering and count the Omer, because it was indeed a very, very challenging time. Because if you think about it, Pesach time was the beginning of the harvest season, which is very, very important. Just like you have accountants, people who do taxes, it comes tax season, that is the most busiest time of the year. And just at that time, they all had to make Aliyah, Aliyah L'Regel, they had to make their pilgrimage to go up to Yerushalayim and spend a week away from their home, from their family, from their field, and then they go back. And just as things are beginning to really get busy, less than 2 months later, they have to go back to Yerushalayim for the Yom Tov of Shavuos. So number one, people could be very busy. They could forget. They could be so busy with what they're doing. They could forget that they actually have to go back to Yerushalayim for the Yom Tov of Shavuos. But further, many people, it's a very, very difficult burden. It's something that they ask: how am I going to make a living? How am I going to support my family? How am I going to get through the year if I am spending my whole time hanging out in the Beis Hamikdash on the Har HaBayis, near the Har HaBayis, and then watching what's going on over there, and bringing karbanos and bringing the entire time over there, and I'm not looking after my field? So some say that the Sefiras Haomer the Abu Dram says it was actually an agricultural prayer. You're saying that number one, we're asking Hashem for a bracha, for the hatzlacha, that we should all have success in our parnasa in the field, and number two, it was to strengthen the person's emunah and their faith in Hashem, that no matter how illogical or irrational it is that to spend half of their parnasa season to be in the Beis Hamikdash and to be in Yerushalayim, nevertheless it would bolster and augment their faith in Hashem, and with the knowledge that ultimately they would get all of the everything that they need to accomplish, everything that they needed to sell and to harvest and whatnot, would be able to be accomplished even missing out those few precious weeks. So this is a nice explanation. It gives us a perspective from a historical perspective as to what went on with the Jewish people when they were in Eretz Yisrael in those days. But still, clearly, Sefiras Haomer is a very, very important mitzvah. We do it every single day, especially in the month of Iyar, which every day has that mitzvah. And we need to get a better feeling as to what's the significance of this mitzvah, how it relates to us today. So one of the ideas behind the mitzvah of the Omer offering, as we mentioned before, is that and just one more point to add to this, and we mentioned before that the Sefiras Haomer has a very interesting debate, as we mentioned before, that one opinion says that if you missed out one of the nights of the Omer, you can no longer count, which indeed the halacha is that if a person forgot to count one of the nights, since we are considerate of the opinion that says that you can no longer count in the subsequent nights, if a person did indeed forget to count one night, in the subsequent nights we count, but without a bracha. Which this is as we mentioned, the opinion of the Baal Halachas Gedolos, and this opinion is the one that we are being sensitive to. So what we have from here is a fascinating concept, because at the end of the day, what we're saying is every single night we count. Tonight is 1, tonight is 2, 3 days to the Omer, and so on. But ultimately, even though each night appears to be its own mitzvah, they're all connected somehow. And the question is, why are we saying that all the nights are connected? Seemingly, each night is a mitzvah to count the Omer. How many days that have passed since the Omer? So if I missed a night or I missed another night, why can't I count tonight and say tonight is 10 days, 11 days to the Omer? Why is the fact that I didn't count in the previous night, does that undermine or in any way negate the value and the significance of counting on this specific night? Now, you may say that that's one opinion. There's another opinion. But the truth is, at the end of the day, we are still, since we want to be considerate of that opinion, we no longer, if a person does indeed miss a night, we no longer count with the bracha. That's number one. So the Rebbe, over the years, he would often talk about this opinion. And he says an interesting thing, because the truth is, according to that opinion, there's a big question. What would happen if I'm saying that every night is connected, and once I miss one night, the string unravels, right? And I can no longer continue counting. So I start counting tonight as 1, 2, and the subsequent night. Every night I count. I get up to 20 days, and then I miss one night. So it comes out that the mitzvah is lacking. So seemingly, I should never make a bracha starting from the beginning, because maybe in the middle I'll stop count, I'll miss out one night, and I can no longer count with the bracha. So somehow the previous nights, the mitzvah was lacking. Doesn't that in any way create a hazard that a person should not count in the event that perhaps they may, in the subsequent nights, they'll miss out on the bracha? Or, for example, let's say a person knows that they're gonna do a surgery, or they're not gonna be able to count in one of the nights. Maybe you should not count with the bracha in the previous nights. So the Rebbe raises this point, and he says the truth is, even according to the Baal Halachas, even according to the opinion that says that it's all one big continuum, even that opinion says that every night is its own independent mitzvah. But he says, even if we say it's its own mitzvah, you need to count every night in order to continue with a bracha. Because if you reach the 10th night, and the previous night, the 9th night, you didn't count, how can I say tonight is the 10th night? Where were you yesterday? It's not 10 nights. It's not 10 days from the Omer, because we are missing one of the days. And it is because of this, because of this perspective of the Baal Halachas Gedolos, he says that you can no longer count in the subsequent nights without a bracha. In any case, what we have from all of this is a very, very unique mitzvah of counting. Counting, we don't know what the significance of that counting is, but there's something very, very profound here. And it starts really with the Zohar. The Zohar is the one, that special work which begins to give us a perspective on Sefiras that's not just an agricultural counting and there's this period of time where we look forward to receiving the Torah, but there's actually something a lot more profound, something far deeper and internal in our perspective. Which the significance of that is, the Zohar says that when we look forward to receiving the Torah, it is analogous to the time when preparing for a wedding. The chassan and the kala both go through their special preparations, and the kala, there's the counting of the 7 days to eliminate the spiritual and ritual impurities to be ready for the wedding. And it says, just like there's the 7-day counting period, so too the Jewish people, 7 times 7, there's on an exponential level, the Jewish people counted the 49 days to eradicate and to remove any spiritual impurities. So we already see over here an indication that the notion of these days of the Omer are not just merely counting days, looking forward to a vacation, and we may be very, very excited. In fact, there's that famous medrash that is brought down about that brings an analogy of there was once a person who was thrown into jail. And in those days, being thrown into jail, pretty much there was no hope. It was in a dungeon somewhere underground, and the person had no prospects, no hope. And one day the king comes and says, "Listen up, I want to tell you something. Number one, in a few days you will go free. And number two, I will give you my daughter, her hand, to get married to her. She will be your bride." So when the person heard this, he was very, very skeptical. Didn't really think anything of it. It sounded way too far-fetched, way too out of reach. But what happened was, a few days later, this person was liberated, was set free. So he's thinking to himself, hang on a second. The first thing that the king told me was I was going to go free. That happened. That came to fruition. So quite possibly, the second aspect, the second promise that I will get married to his daughter, it sounded a little bit far-fetched, but now it's sounding actually pretty plausible. And he begins to think about that and dream about that and yearn for that day. And therefore, every single day, he started to count, to look forward, when will that time come? And in a similar way, Moshe Rabbeinu came to the Jewish people when they were Mitzrayim, and they were so out of touch spiritually and emotionally. They were totally enslaved in terms of their mentality and in terms of their prospects. And he tells them, you're going to go free and you're going to receive the Torah. And they couldn't really connect. This message did not resonate with them at all. But when the time came and they were liberated from Mitzrayim, they began to think to themselves, hang on, Moshe Rabbeinu said we're leaving Mitzrayim, that came true, we are also most probably going to receive the Torah as well. And they began to count and look forward to those days. So that's certainly an element of the Sefiras Haomer, our longing and yearning towards the time that we will indeed receive a Torah. But the Zohar is telling us there's something far deeper at play. But it's not just, it's actually part of the process. We don't just look forward and start checking off days on a calendar. Today is 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, and very soon we'll receive the Torah. You actually have to prepare yourself. There's something that's very, very profound. There's something very, very deep has to happen before we're able to receive the Torah. Because ultimately, the Torah is the wisdom and the will of Hashem can really saturate our lives with meaning and with purpose. But in order to receive that, we have to be able to do something that will actually make us suitable to receive the Torah. As there's the famous mashal that's given, the Friedrich Rebbe once explained about the famous mashal of the king. There was a king in Poland who once came to a Jewish town, and he tasted one of the most amazing delicacies, most delicious things in his life. He said, "Tell me, what is this?" He says, "This is cholent. This is an amazing Jewish delectable food." And he says, "Wow, this is amazing, amazing. And what's that over there in the cholent? These are beans. This is barley." He had a little bit of Haomer in there. And then he tasted the most amazing thing. He says, "What's this? This is kishka." Kishka is delicious. And he says, I need to call my chief chef, and I need to tell him about this. This is delicious. This is the most amazing thing. And he goes, when he comes back to his palace, he tells the chef, "You have to go down to that little shul over there, in that little shtibel. They make the best cholent, and especially you need to get the recipe for the kishka." So he goes there, and he finds the little Rebbitzin over there, and he starts, she gives him the whole recipe. This is how many eggs, and this is how much flour, and a little bit of spices. It's you put this all together. It's amazing. He takes the recipe, he comes back to the castle, and he says, "Okay, Your Highness, tonight I am making you cholent, I am making you kishka." And the king can't wait. And finally the time comes, he comes into the room, and he presents to the king the kishka. And the king takes one bite, and he spits it out, and he says, "Ach, disgusting! This is atrocious. This reeks." He says, "Tell me a second. Do you have the recipe?" He says, "Yes." He says, "Go double check. I think you did something wrong." And he says, "No, the eggs, the bean, the flour, and the spices. No, it's all there. It's all there." He says, "You need to go back to that Rebbe. You need to figure out you did something very, very wrong. This tastes awful. This tastes rancid." And he goes back to the Rebbitzin into the shtibel, and she says, "Let's see, what do you got?" And she's checking. "Yes, you have the flour, you have the eggs, and you got it all. Hang on a second. So you have the intestine, you have the kishka. What's missing?" So she says, "Hang on a second. Did you clean out the kishka before you put in the spices, before you put in all the ingredients?" He says, "No, you didn't tell me to do that. I just put everything in." So the Rebbitzin said, "This is your problem. You see, before you make this most delectable kishka, you need to remove and clean out and cleanse this kishka, and then only then can you put everything in." And the Friedrich Rebbe says this is the significance of the Sefiras Haomer in the Jewish tradition, which we yearn and look forward to this amazing time when we will receive the Torah. The Torah is full of many beautiful ideals and values. It is like the most delectable ingredients that constitute this amazing kishka. But of course, if we are not going to remove and clean out what's inside this kishka, as delicious as those ingredients may be, as is inspiring and as uplifting, and how much depth and meaning the Torah may give us in our lives, if on the inside we have rotten midos, our values, our perspectives, our value system in life, if it is not anchored in true Torah ideals, if we don't really truly work on ourselves, then as much Torah as we may study and internalize in our lives, nevertheless, we will be like that kishka, which will not in any way be tasteful or something that anyone wants to have anything to do with. And this is true in life. we have to know that the Torah could teach us many amazing, beautiful things. But the question is something deeper. It's not whether we go to shul and we daven, or in our case, when we in the shul in our homes, but in any mitzvah that we do, there's the mitzvah that we do, and then there is what's behind that mitzvah. What really drives us? What really motivates us? What is our true yearning and desire? A person could be davening, right? And we could go through the motions and say the words. But are we truly present? Are we truly there? We know the famous story of the Rebbe Levi Yitzchak of Barditchev. He was in shul one morning, and he goes over to one of his fellow mispalim, his chassidim, and he had just finished reciting the Shemona Esrei. He comes over to him, Rebbe Yid, Shalom Aleichem. Shalom Aleichem. Why are you telling me Shalom Aleichem? He says, well, I observed you during davening, and I saw that in your mind you already traveled. You were not present at all. And I know you're a merchant. You go to Leipzig, and you're buying and selling. And I saw already in the way you were swaying back and forth that your mind was totally somewhere else. You have gone there. You were thinking about your busy day that you have, the transactions that you have to do. And therefore, I see now that you've concluded, you sold your merchandise, you made your money, you came back. So from here to Leipzig, it's quite a long journey, and you came back now. So I want to tell you, Shalom Aleichem, welcome back. Thank you for joining us here in Barditchev. And that's true in many, many ways, that in all the things that we do in life, whether it's we're with our family, with our friends, and we're there. But are we really there? Is our mind somewhere else? When we do an act of charity, we share with someone. Why are we really doing it? Are we doing it because we truly care about that person? We are sensitive to their predicament and their story, whether it's a tragedy, whether it's in some way we can help that person. Are we doing it because we want to help them? Or sometimes it's our ego. We want to look at ourselves and say, oh, I'm such a nice person. I help people. Or I want people to think that I'm a nice person. I'm so generous, and they'll admire my philanthropy and the acts of chesed I do in the community. So in everything that we do, there is the act, there is the deed, but then there is the motive, there is the drive, there is that's our search for meaning, which is beyond, which lays beneath all that we do. And this is what we analyze when it comes to the time of the Haomer. We look at ourselves, and to prepare for the Torah, we have to ask ourselves, what really motivates us in life? What makes us tick, in a word? There's the story of that I read recently about this woman who came to the Chabad rabbi in Vienna, Rabbi Yaakov Biederman, and she tells him that, you came here to Vienna, you think that you were from the first Chabad, you were the first Chabad rabbi here. I actually, and he came, I believe, in the 70s. She says, I am actually the first Chabad Shaliach here to Vienna in Austria. And she says, many, many years ago, it was in fact in the 50s, and her story is a whole story. She was telling the rabbi how she survived, which is for another time, how she survived the Holocaust. She was an opera singer, a whole story. But I wanted to focus on one aspect of her story. She says before she was traveling home, she met with the Rebbe in New York, and the Rebbe said, I have a very special, before you go back, I want you to do two things for me. One of the things the Rebbe asked her to do is, I need you to go to there's a certain person in Vienna, his name is Dr. Viktor Frankl, and I want you to pass over, convey a message to him. And the Rebbe says, I want you to tell him that the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Schneerson in New York, has a message for you, and that is, you should not give up. Even though you feel down and you feel that people are not appreciating you, you should continue with determination, and ultimately, your perspective and your value system will ultimately be vindicated. That was a brief paraphrasing what the Rebbe told this lady what she should tell him. So when she comes to Vienna, she goes to the hospital where he was working, and she to his department, and she says, "I'm looking for Dr. Viktor Frankl," and they said, "Sorry, he hasn't been here in a few weeks. He's not here now." So she doesn't know what to do. She's searching for him. She can't find him. She looks him up in the phone book, and she decides to go pay a personal visit to his private residence, to his home. She comes to his house and knocks on the door, and she wasn't even sure, is this the right person? The door opens up. There's this lady there. She sees behind her that there's a tzelem hanging. She thought perhaps she had the wrong address, but she says, "I'm looking. Yes, can I help you? I'm looking for Dr. Viktor Frankl." She says, "Hold on a moment," and this man comes to the door. He looks mamish. He looks very down and very distressed. Very, very much, he looks like he's in a very, very serious emotional state. And she says, "Yes, how could I help you? I have a message from Rabbi Schneerson in New York." What's the message? The Rebbe says that you should not give up, you should continue, be determined, and ultimately you'll see much success in all that you do. And when he hears this, he breaks down, he starts sobbing, and he's crying and crying. And she didn't really understand the significance. He says, "Thank you so much," and she leaves him. What really happened was that in those days, the Viktor Frankl, he was charting a whole new path, a whole new perspective in the world of psychoanalysis. And in those times, there was the famous Sigmund Freud, which his perspective was that what really was the motivating factor in a person was all about physiology, was all very much mechanics. A person is motivated by pleasure. It's the body, the human person responds to the various stimuli and the various phenomena that they encounter in the world. And really, the way we respond to that, what pushes us, what motivates us, is self-gratification and pleasure. Very, very physical. What you see is what you get. But Viktor Frankl, he had a whole different perspective. And what he saw was that ultimately a person, there was something more, there was something deeper. And this was really his views on life were molded, were shaped by his experiences, especially in the Holocaust, when he was in the camps, he was in Auschwitz, and he noticed this phenomenon where you have many, many people going through the exact same experience, and yet each person responded in a different way. He saw some people, and he was trying to understand this phenomenon. You have some people they're subject to brutal torture and abuse, and they're beaten and they're down and they're out. They surrendered and they gave up. That was one kind of people. You had some people who, despite all that they went through, all of the horrific torture and dehumanization that they experienced, there was somehow they still had this ability and this will to live. And they, no matter what, they continued to survive despite all of that in the Holocaust. And he was asking himself, what's the difference? Why do some people have it one way and some people the other way? Some people are totally defeated, demoralized, and crushed physically and spiritually, emotionally, and there's some people that just continue to truck on. And the conclusion that he came to, what he came to the realization was that ultimately the difference that between all of these people, he could find the only common thread he could find between the people who had the will to live on and the people who didn't is a simple thing. And that is, why did these people have a will to live? Because they all had something that was driving or motivating them, each of them in one way or another. Maybe this person had a family, had a wife, had children. This person had a career. This person had some philosophy, something in life, some value system. And he came to the realization that if you have a why in your life, why you want to live, you have some purpose, some meaning, then there can be a how. There could be an ability for this person to continue, no matter the most inhuman in the most unfathomable of circumstances, the person could continue to survive because they have that will. And that will was driven by the search or the knowledge that there was something meaningful in their life. And that was their purpose of living. So at that time, and whereas the people who didn't, it's very, very hard to live. If you don't have a reason to live, if you don't have a purpose that underpins everything that you do, it is very, very hard in the face of all this excruciating torture to continue to survive. But his view at that time was ridiculed, was mocked by all of his colleagues and his peers. They said, this is ridiculous. A person has some kind of spiritual or metaphysical aspect in their lives, and that motivates them and pushes them. At that time, this was already in the 1950s. They said this is what you're talking about is pseudoscience. There's no basis in reality. There's nothing to it. It's Haken Shainik. That's what they basically said. And he worked so hard in trying to convince. And he was a professor. Could you imagine? You're a professor in a university, and no one's coming to your lectures. No one's coming and listening to you. Everyone's laughing at you. It was demoralizing. It was crushing. And at some point, he felt, this is way too hard, and I'm sorry. I'm going to give up. That's how he was he was literally at the point of total surrender. And here it is at this point he already began to draft his resignation papers, and he was going to mail it in, and that's it, and call it a day. And it is at this point that this lady comes to his door, and she knocks and says, I have a message from the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who believes in you and believes in your story, and you should continue, don't give up, continue to fight, and ultimately your view will be vindicated, and people will come around and appreciate it. This was so life-changing. This was so vivifying. It totally transformed him and energized him to the point that he continued. He ripped up his resignation papers, and he continued with determination. And indeed, not too long afterwards, the Rebbe's assurance, which was really a bracha as well, came to fruition. And of course, he published his famous book, Man's Search for Meaning, published translated into nearly 30 languages, 10 million copies, and so on. He became an international sensation and one of the most respected in his field. The Rebbe would several times refer to his path, his perspective, and the story is amazing, of course, because we see in this how the Rebbe, this one of the hallmark of the Rebbe, where it was so typical, where he saw a person who is literally down and out and on the verge of just like falling into the abyss, and the Rebbe believes in that person and thinking about that person, sends someone to literally lift them up and realize that person's special and unique potential, and to totally transform their lives. But my point in all of this is really this perspective that we have over here, is that at the end of the day, each and every one of us are very, very different in our genetic makeup, in our skill set, our resources, our talents, our abilities. Everyone in one way or another has something that makes them tick. And that's the important thing. Some excel in certain areas. Some of us are good community organizers. Some of us are good at studying. Some people meditate. Everyone has their strength. But what's important is not so much is what you do, and your strength is as much as why you're doing it. What really motivates you? What motivates me? And when we become to identify that, sometimes we could look at it and realize that we're not so impressed with what we see. What we may have construed to a certain point that may have been something we thought was noble and idealistic, we come to realize perhaps we were very much egocentric and narcissistic. We thought we were being nice, and we're sitting around here in this Corona situation, and we say, I need to do something good. I'm going to go help this person. I'm going to go help that person, and we ask ourselves, why did I just do that? Did I do it because I really care about that person, or am I doing it for a selfish motive? And this is what Sefiras Haomer is all about. That we need to really plumb and to dig into the depth of our psyche and ask ourselves, why? Why are we doing what we do? And why is that important? Because as we know, every single day of the Omer, we say, today is 1 day to the Omer, 2 days to the Omer. And we ask the question, why are we counting backwards? Why aren't we counting as to how many days are left till Shavuos? If you're looking forward to your vacation, if you're looking forward to that special wedding day, you don't say, oh, we sent out the invitations 2 days ago, we sent out the invitations 3 ago. You say, how many days are left until this special occasion? Because every single day is 1 day that we left from Mitzrayim. When the Jewish people were in a very, very spiritually decadent and denigrated state, they were like the behemoth. As we mentioned before, the Omer was the offering, the grain offering of barley, which was animal fodder. And just like the animal which walks upon the earth, the animal can be a beautiful thing, right? But what does the animal look at? It looks at the earth. It has no aspiration, no vision about something that's greater than itself. It's only thinking about one thing. What can I do, and how can I get something that will make me feel better, something that will enhance my pleasure, my existence? That's what the animal thinks about. It doesn't have altruistic, selfless, transcendent tendencies at all. It has no spirit. The human being walks on its 2 feet, its head raised up high and proud, looking towards the heaven, which symbolizes something that is greater than just itself. So when the Jewish people leave Mitzrayim, they're on the level of the behemoth, on the spiritual animal, which is about self-aggrandizement, self-preservation, self-enhancement. And the process of the Omer is where every single day we say today is 1 day and 2 days. It's about spiritual growth. It's about spiritual refinement. And every day we say today is the week of Chesed. This week is the week of Chesed. This week is the week of Gvura. Because on a spiritual level, we need to look at every single midah. We need to look at every single attribute or aspect of our lives and refine them. Because it is only then, when 49 days later, when we receive the Torah, we won't be like that kishka, like that intestine, which we filled with delectable and amazing values and ideals of the Torah, but it is mixed with a very rancid odor of our ego, of our narcissism, or other things, other toxic emotions that we have. Maybe it's anger, maybe it's resentment. It could be many, many things that we have in our lives. So a person who studies Torah and understands and wants to fulfill many, many amazing mitzvahs, that's great. But how do we reconcile that with the kind of person we truly are? And that's why the Torah says every single day it's a time to meditate and reflect and to introspect and see each aspect of our lives that needs true refinement. So just to give an example, as the time does not allow us to go through all 49 days, let's talk about chesed, let's talk about kindness. You could have kindness that is beautiful and altruistic. You can have kindness that is self-serving and that is not as sensitive as we may think. I was reading about a story about a chassid who was in Siberia. And he was a stubborn one, and no matter what they did, they tried to break his spirit. They tried to undermine his determination, but they weren't able to. His resolve, his commitment was something spectacular. And after a long time, it came time for them to release him. So they call him in with another fellow elderly Jew into the room, and they said, okay, you have served your time, it is time to go home. You just need to sign on your papers over here, and that's it. You're free to go. So the chassid said, listen, I'm sorry, I can't do that, but today is Shabbos. And on my holy day of Shabbos, I do not sign. They said, Jew, this is not time for you to practice your religious self-righteousness and all of that. We had enough of that. We had enough of you. Just sign on the paper and go home. He said, I'm sorry, I will not do that. They said, well, if you don't sign on the paper, you're not going free. You're going to stay here. He says, well, if that's the case, so be it. I'm not going anywhere. they are frustrated, and they turned to the next Jew, who was an older person, and they said, "Look, sign on the paper." Now, this other Jew was not religious. He was not. He did the whole Shabbos thing didn't mean a thing. But now he saw this other chassid. This chassid is here. He's not. He's taking a stand with his conviction and with his resolve. Now, what is he going to not? Is he going to now sign and desecrate the holy Shabbos? He says, "Listen, I'm with this guy. It's Shabbos. I'm not going to sign. If you want me to stay, I'm going to stay." At this point, these officers are furious. But at this point, this chassid, the other chassid, says, "Listen, I'm going to sign for that fellow Jew." They said, "What do you mean you're going to sign for that fellow Jew? You just said it's your holy Shabbos. You're not going to sign. Now, what is this about?" He said, "Listen, for myself, I'm a committed person. I can't sign at Shabbos. But for this Jew, he's an elderly Jew. If he's going to stay in Siberia for any longer, it will imperil his health and well-being. It's pikuach nefesh, which overrides the Shabbos. I am willing to sign for him. For myself, I won't sign. For that Jew, I will sign." When the officer saw that, he was totally awe-inspired, and he was totally impressed with that noble gesture. And he says, "You know what? Leave it to me. I'm going to sign for you both." He signs for both of them, and they are liberated. They are set free. We have chesed. Sometimes we think about kindness. Many times people do kindness, but do we truly generate within ourselves a feeling of kindness that's not in any way something that benefits us, totally benefiting that person? Chesed of chesed. Or is there within that chesed, with the kindness and our generosity, is there some tinge, or is there some aspect that is tainted somehow, that we try to see that it will enhance our lives or make ourselves better, or make ourselves feel better? And every single day, and we could go through every single day or every aspect of our lives and find aspects that are less than noble. But then every single day, it's the Sefira, which Sefira, as Chassidus tells us, comes from the word sapir, sapphire. We polish and we work on every aspect in our lives till our character is sterling and shining and beautiful. At that point, we're ready to receive the Torah. I just want to conclude and to just really to show the other side of the coin, and that is, you may say, hang on, this sounds way too much. How indeed are we going to be able to change ourselves? Right? It seems to be far too daunting, something that is way out of reach. Through the 2 months, we're going to totally transform ourselves. We're married for 40 years to the same person with the same issues, and now all of a sudden, we're going to change. It seems way too far-fetched. So I just wanted to share one perspective, and that is, in the words of the Chinuch tells us that Achrei Pe'ula is Nimshach Halev. Very, very, talking about psychology and talking about psychoanalysis, one of the great truths about life is that sometimes, as much as we were talking till now about our motives counterintuitively, sometimes you should forget about your motives and you should work on your actions. But if you work on the actions, our emotions and our motivations will actually follow the lead of our actions. Will follow the deed. There's a famous story of the Rebbe about this girl. It's actually two stories. One is about a Kala who was about to get married, and she was thinking to herself she wanted to cancel the wedding because she felt that she was too impulsive. She had no patience, and she really felt bad. Like many Jewish husbands, they would be subject to a very, very long life, and she felt that it's not right. Let me take a few years. I'm going to go to therapy. I'll go check myself into some yoga classes, and then I'll get married to this guy, and then I'll be ready to make a life. And the Rebbe said, no, you should not cancel the wedding. Chas v'shalom. The Rebbe suggested what you should do is you should go to a little gan, a little kindergarten, and work over there. Go once a week and teach the kids, read a story to them. And that will teach you how to work with children. It'll teach you some patience, some tolerance, and that will help. Story number one. Story number two, of a girl who was having a very difficult time with shidduchim. It wasn't coming so easy. And she was very, very frustrated, and she began to self-diagnose. She said, I know what my problem is. My issue is that I am so egocentric. I'm so full of myself, and I have no place in my life. There's no space for anybody else. What I need to do is I need to go figure myself out. I need to go to some guru and work on this and figure it all out. The Rebbe gave an idea. He said, what you should do is you should go to the local school, and when it comes the lunchtime, the meal time, stand over there, and you should be one of those who help dish out the food. And this will teach you how to share with others, to give. First thing that you do is think about others before thinking about yourself. And this is a very, very classic Rebbe perspective. Many people, they want to figure out what's going on in their psyche and in their emotions and their motivations, what makes me tick. And as much as we spoke about that for the past hour, but we have to remember that sometimes what you need to do is, if you're going to try to figure yourself out and you can try to fix all of that, it may take forever. But if you really want to work on it in a very concrete and in a way that will actually have a transformative effect, we have to remember that sometimes doing good things will actually have that powerful effect. This person was saying, I'm too full of myself. I'm too egocentric. So what are you going to do? Sit and philosophize how to undo all of that? What you have to do is not to be egocentric. Go share, go help another person, and automatically it will grow on you. You will begin to cultivate within yourselves a feeling of selflessness, a sense of wanting to help other people. And automatically, everything will heal itself. So, Emirtz Hashem, each and every one of us, through these days of Haomer, we will begin to take that step each day, one day at a time. And through this, we are able to cleanse ourselves. Spiritually, we are ready to receive the Torah. We should be Zaycha to receive the Torah of Mashiach, with the coming of Mashiach, b'mheira v'yameinu, amen. Okay, thank you very much for joining us this week. I am muted, everyone, if anyone wants to ask any questions. And Emir Hashem, we will continue next week at 10 o'clock Sunday morning. We will continue and the show will go on.